Do not go gentle into that good night. Old age should burn and rave at close of day. Rage, rage against the dying of the light.
What's up, movie friends? Welcome back to Raiders of the Lost Podcast. I'm Anthony.
And this is James, and today, obviously, we're going to be talking about the phenomenal film Interstellar by Christopher Nolan, which was actually in development for a while. Steven Spielberg was attached to direct it back in like 2006. He hired Jonathan Nolan to to write the script, but he actually just went on to do other projects instead, and that's when eventually Jonathan Nolan convinced his brother to do it.
Yeah, Jonathan Nolan wrote the first draft, and then he went on to his TV productions. He did Person of Interest in Westworld, and then something else I can't remember. But Chris Nolan, I think they were just hanging out one day, and he told Chris Nolan about this script, and he was very interested in it. So he read it, and then Chris Nolan loved the idea and the concept of traveling through dimension, traveling through galaxies, and traveling through time with the use of a wormhole and black holes. And then he took those concepts of the script, but then he changed the script a lot in terms of his own kind of story for it. So he made it more of a personal film about family, especially the relationship between a father and a daughter. So he took a very sci-fi action-heavy script and he turned it into a very personal one.
Yeah, it's really, a lot of it's about love and these concepts of time. And does love transcend dimensions? Kind of like how in the film they describe that gravity can transcend time and dimensions. And does love have that same effect? And this movie, every time I watch it, it gets better each time. And I don't understand the hate that Interstellar gets. A lot of people love it, and I relate to that obsession that many viewers have with Interstellar and Chris Nolan's films. But I think there's a stigma against Nolan for some people, and for some reason, they just don't like Interstellar, which is fine. You can like what you like, but this movie, it's a borderline masterpiece in so many different ways. I mean, production elements, the set design, the acting, the writing, the cinematography by Hoyt. Everything on this movie is exceptional filmmaking, let alone the strong themes that are involved in the film as well. The best way to support Raiders of the Lost Podcast is to become a patron at patreon.com/Raiders of the Lost Podcast. You'll get perks like personalized messages, personalized videos, podcast schedules, our daily posts, as well as top-tier patrons get a monthly shout-out on the podcast, and you'll be getting exclusive video content from us, as well as exclusive patron giveaway contests. Head on over to our new website, RaidersOfTheLostPodcast.com, to check out all of our sources of content, our merch, our custom movie posters, and you can also sign up for Patreon there.
Yeah, I'm not sure about the dislike for it. It's definitely there. I don't know why. I think it's a fantastic movie, and it was a big challenge for Nolan because this was his first film post the Dark Knight trilogy. Yes, he did Inception.
That was 2010, before Rises.
Before Rises, but this was like he's done with the Dark Knight trilogy, so now what's he going to do? And so everyone was very curious, like, what's his first movie post the DC universe going to be? And I remember when the first trailer came out, I thought it's one of the best trailers I've ever seen. It was so inspiring. Kind of reminds me of like the Man of Steel trailer. Super inspirational. The music was great, and it was just curious because like all Nolan trailers, especially with Tenet, he gives nothing away in the marketing and the advertising. He, like we'll get into in a little bit, he hides things in the film that don't show up in the marketing either. So you always walk into one of his movies kind of like in having really no concept of what it is or what's going to happen, which is a great thing. I think so many trailers nowadays, you can literally pinpoint the entire story of a movie in trailers nowadays, and like it spoils everything. And like, for example, I saw Sound of Metal, and the trailer of Sound of Metal ends with this shot of Riz Ahmed with a shaved head, and he's just like staring off with like, he seems to have a peaceful look in his eye.
Should we say spoiler alert right now?
Yeah, spoiler alert. And then I was like, when I saw the trailer, I'm like, that's probably the last shot of the movie. And then I watched the movie, and that was the last shot. Mm-hmm. So I think when you give away the last shot, because you can put that in the trailer, but it doesn't have to be at the end of the trailer. You know what I mean? Because I realized it was a spoiler because that's how they ended the 2-minute bit. And I was like, well, that kind of spoiled the ending for me.
Yeah, well, I think Nolan has a lot of control over his trailers in terms of not revealing the entire storyline, where a lot of studios, they want you to see the storyline so that you're more enticed to come in a way. And they're afraid of being mysterious to audiences in a way, I think.
They want to show all the cool stuff.
Yeah. But I think that's one of the strengths of film marketing is the mystery behind it. And I think this is the most anticipated movie I've ever seen because, of course, like you said, coming off the Batman trilogy, what's Nolan going to do? Obviously, like one of our favorite filmmakers. And again, the trailers were fantastic. And if you watch this movie, it's probably the most un-Nolan-esque movie for like the first act, where it's a very linear sequence for the first act of the film compared to Nolan's other films, where he usually starts at the beginning and end at the same time, where he's got two different storylines going back and forth. And it's really not until Coop is out in space and they leave Miller's planet, where they have the effect of losing 23 years of Earth time. That's when we start going cross-cutting back on Earth.
Yeah, because I mean, even in Batman Begins, he's playing around with time. Dark Knight and Rises, obviously not so much the same way, but with Tenet, obviously he plays with time a ton, and so
a little bit.
And so it was refreshing, and it was I think what makes this movie, like you said, it's different for Nolan. The first act, the first 40 minutes or so, is because it just feels really grounded. Usually when you watch a Nolan movie, it's very big and very high concept and just very exciting. And it does get to all those points, but not until later in the film. Whereas the first act of this movie, it's about a family on a farm.
Yeah, and usually Nolan will tell you the rules of the environment and the rules of his world in the first couple scenes of a movie, or just hints at it, but you don't really get that in this movie because it opens with the flashback of his ship crashing, or the dream, and then we're just following this life of Coop and his family in this linear storyline until they get to NASA, and then they eventually leaves Earth to go try to find a new home. So it's very different in terms of not showing you a bombastic opening sequence, obviously like Tenet, Inception, and Dark Knight Rises, these wild, amazing, epic opening scenes.
And on top of that, I think this is his only film probably where he addresses, concerns about humanity, especially for the future of humanity.
Well,
where
Tenet's like that.
At the present, the world is dealing with big catastrophes in terms of
near future.
Yeah, there's a food shortage happening on Earth, and pretty much anything that humans have been trying to grow has just failed, and the only things that we can grow at the time are corn and okra, and the world has abandoned the idea of exploration, the idea of seeking out new answers and solving new problems, and it's focused on just dealing with what's happening in the world. Like they have the weather's changed, climate change has really affected this area, especially with these massive dust storms, which have made it very difficult for people to live their lives. And I think that Nolan, he's fascinated by not just like what's going to happen in the next couple of generations, but what's going to happen to humanity in the next hundreds of years or even thousands of years, which is really fascinating to talk about.
Yeah, so the world that this is set in, it's near future. So Donald, played by John Lithgow, he represents us. He's millennials. He's that generation grown up. So technically...
So he had TikTok.
Yeah, so he had TikTok. So Murph represents like if I had a grandchild in the future. So that's that generation. Then the world is there's no more wars. There's no more armies. And then again, there's like almost no food because okra is dying out and corn eventually is going to die out. I mean, the wheat's gone. Earth is running out of oxygen. Pretty much anyone who needs to be employed there, they're becoming farmers. And that's like the new high-class job, is becoming a farmer.
Trying to produce food for a starving world.
Because they didn't run out of television screens or planes, they ran out of food. And this is like a caretaking generation for a world that's dying and trying to come back to life. And I like that Nolan doesn't really tell you really what happened to the world, or was it a...
Yeah, he doesn't have to.
Was it a war? Was it climate change? Was it a combination of both? And then we have the
and people want to complain about exposition in Nolan movies.
Yeah, it's more fun to think of it yourself. And then I love the concept of NASA still being around, and NASA being this secret underground society, organization for the government that's trying to solve the problem of avoiding the extermination of the human race. And I love how Cooper mentions that the government wanted NASA to fly up and scorch the planet Earth to try to reset the planet in a way, and like, I'm assuming they would have people flying in ships waiting for it to heal itself.
Mm-hmm. And the biggest thing that Nolan addresses is that a world like this, it's lost hope, and it's just focused on trying to deal with the problems at hand. Where throughout the advancement of human history, we have gained technology and advanced ourselves through experimentation, exploration, adventure, invention, dreaming. And he addresses that. I mean, it's possible that a world like this can exist where we're encouraged not to try and dream and not to try and explore and not to try and advance technology, but instead to just focus on the past and what we have. And like, for example, the schools are teaching kids that we didn't actually land on the moon anymore because they don't want to inspire hope of dreams of leaving the planet because they deem that to be a waste of time. Where if you look at history, every major technological advancement or discovery, or whether it be medical technology, whatever it is, engineering, science, like it was all created through people dreaming big and exploring their ideas and trying to achieve something or accomplish something. And so that's something that Cooper has always wanted to do. He never had a chance to really explore and use his skills and use his talents to try and make the world a better place. And so that's why when he's given the opportunity, he doesn't hesitate to leave.
And I love how Donald, when they're sitting out on the porch having a beer, he's like, you were good at something and you never got to use it. You're either born 40 years too early or 40 years too late. He's kind of stuck. Like, he should have been in the past, in the golden age of aircrafts and engineering and space travel, or 40 years later in this time when we're getting further back into space travel, which he wants to do. And in a way, you can look at Coop and think, here's this engineer, this pilot who's forced to be a farmer now out of necessity for the planet. He had to give up his dreams, and he has a family to look after, and he takes this almost suicide mission to go save the world, and he's doing it to save his daughter. But in a way, there's something about his philosophy behind taking this mission that he doesn't think that it's a suicide mission at all. In a way, he believes in a way that he's coming back to Murph, he's coming back to his family, and it's something about that drives him even further.
I think he believes that it's the only way they'll be able to save the Earth is by getting out there and exploring. You know what I mean? So that's why I think he's so excited about it, because he thinks that we're all wasting our time trying to grow as much corn as we can, because that's not going to solve the problem. Because like Dr. Brandt tells him, eventually corn is going to die too. So they're going to run out of food, and those who don't starve, they're going to die from lack of oxygen in the atmosphere. So there's no hope left on this planet. And so he's finally like, okay, finally someone has given me the opportunity to really get out there and explore and try to find a way out of this, which is what I've always believed as the case for escaping this doom that we've put upon ourselves.
Yeah, because he thinks back to humanity and how we used to look up at the sky and wonder what our place was in the stars, rather than worrying about our place here in the dirt for when we eventually die. And before we get a little further into the film, I want to explore another big idea about this movie, or how someone explored big ideas for this movie, Hans Zimmer specifically.
Oh, yeah.
With one of the greatest film scores that's ever been made, I think ever, definitely this century. It's up there. It's my personal favorite score. And he's one of those people in film, like Nolan, who very seldom actually gets awards or accolade, like the highest honors in terms of Oscars. And
he only has one.
Yeah, so and they both only have one Oscar. And because Nolan even won, he only got his first. I mean, he didn't even win, right? He won for Memento, right?
No, he got nominated.
Oh, yeah.
He never won an Oscar.
Nolan's never even won an Oscar, which is crazy. But despite year after year, both these guys turn out some of the best projects and work in the industry. And I listen to these tracks all the time, and the amount of tracks in the score that gives me chills on a daily basis is insane. And the elements of the score are so diverse. Like the film, some tracks are inspiring, some are hopeful, some are epic, and then just like parts of the film, some are dark and even like horror-esque.
To find the main theme for this, Christopher Nolan wrote a little short story. I believe it was I think the simplest form of this story, where a father abandons his daughter because it was necessary to do it. And so he wrote this little short story about that. Had nothing to do with sci-fi or anything. It was just like simple, personal short story.
2 lines of dialogue.
That little drama. And he gave it to Hans Zimmer. He's like, give me music for this and read this and show me what you can come up with. And then Hans Zimmer read the story, and he was inspired, and he wrote what would eventually be the main theme of Interstellar on his keyboard, and he played it for Christopher Nolan at his studio. And then Nolan listened to that, and he said, okay, now I have to make the movie. So now I know what to do now that I've heard this theme. So it's an amazing score. And obviously you could say the biggest difference between any other Hans Zimmer score is the heavy use of organs in this, which is something Nolan wanted, because I think space can be seen as like almost a spiritual thing, not just cosmic, but a spiritual idea. And you can look at it as through a religious lens. And when you think of religion, you think of an organ in a church, if you're a Catholic. And so they decided on an organ, and the organ they used for this film, it's one of the biggest organs in America, and it was so big that they had to travel to the church where it was because there's no way to move it out of the church. And they hired the local organ player for that church, the guy who's been playing that organ for decades. They asked him to play the music because Hans Zimmer can play piano pretty well, but what he wrote in this score is extremely complex, like crazy notes, and it's just you need an expert level player to be able to play the music that he wrote. And he doesn't even play the organ. It's like a piano, but like times 3. It's a complicated instrument. And so he gave this organist the music, and the guy just busted it out, no problem, and played the entire score. And they recorded the audio inside that actual church. So when you hear the organ in this movie, that was recorded inside of a church in like the Midwest.
Yeah, well, organs like that, I'm assuming it's a massive one. It's actually built into the church.
Yeah.
And like the tubes of the organ funnels, if you want to call them, are underneath the ground of the church too, on the floor. So it's like you can't move it.
It's like a piano crossed with a wind instrument.
Yeah,
the organ,
and built into the actual building itself. And what makes this score so moving is how personal it is, just like the film. Because again, he wrote the theme not knowing about science fiction in the elements of the film, not knowing about the space travel elements of the film, but just knowing about this personal story, this story about a father who has to leave a child for an important job. And the 2 lines in the short story were, "I'll come back," and then the child says, "When?" That's the only 2 dialogue in the short story, and that's one of the most important scenes of the film, is where Coop is leaving Murph, and she's asking when he's going to come back, and he has no idea when he's going to come back. He's trying to cheer her up and say, "We might even be the same age when I come back. Who knows?" And then she's like, "You have no idea when you're coming back." So, and that's such an emotionally powerful scene. And I mean, I get goosebumps just thinking about it and talking about it. And I think that's all infused in the score that Hans Zimmer came up with. And this might be the closest bond between filmmaker and composer in a movie I've ever seen.
Yeah, I think that you can only compare them to Steven Spielberg and John Williams.
But I just mean just this movie alone.
Yeah, this movie I think I think it could be my favorite score as well. It's absolutely stunning. And the production of this film is just absolutely incredible. And it's hard to believe that he actually had less money than with The Dark Knight Rises. I think he only had $150 million for this one. And he got a new cinematographer for this film. Like we've mentioned before, Wally Pfister went on and directed his own project, and now he does commercials and stuff. So he became a director. And even though he's a brilliant cinematographer, he won the Oscar for Inception, and he shot all of Nolan's movies except for his first one. They parted their ways, and Hoyt Van Hoytema was tapped to make this film. And Hoyt is we've talked about him many times by now.
Yes,
he's one of the best in the game. He's incredible, and the reason why he works so well with Nolan is because he's a lover of film as well. He's a lover of in-camera practicality and as little CGI as possible. He's a fan of as much natural light as possible. So I think they have a lot of similarities with how they approach filmmaking. And on top of that, he just has a natural eye for creating incredible, beautiful imagery. And for this film, I believe up to this point in filmmaking, it involved the most IMAX footage ever shot in a narrative feature film.
They only used one IMAX camera. I think that's the only camera they used.
Yeah, and it's the first film to ever shoot IMAX with handheld. And so Hoyt Van Hoytema, he's a big guy, and he actually retrofitted an IMAX camera, which are notoriously heavy. So no one's ever used them handheld because they're just so big. But Hoyt's a big guy, so he just literally was holding this with the shoulder rig on his shoulder, filming an IMAX for most of this movie, which is why it looks so stunning.
Yeah, and they also were using prototype lenses that really they were just kind of making adjustments to on the fly because, again, they weren't really official lenses for IMAX. So, again, that's another reason why this looks so stunning. And just one quick thing on Hans Zimmer again is he uses this aspect of time passing in the music as well. So a lot of tracks and a lot of these high intense moments have a 60 BPM at 60 BPM, like on Miller's Planet, like on the No Time for Caution song, which is playing during docking, the Coward song with Dr. Mann and Coop fighting on the frozen planet. And so if you actually watch and listen to it, it's a 60 BPM that you can literally just count at the same time. And I think that again shows this concept of time and how important it is to this film, because not only is it something that the characters really truly don't understand, it's something that we don't really understand at all either. We all know like what time is as a concept, but we don't really understand it because time, it happens all at once in the universe, but we can never perceive that because we're just three-dimensional beings, but in these bulk beings, they're five-dimensional, so they experience it differently.
Well, I get into the science aspect of it.
Well, I mean, we might as well. We just dab. So yeah, I just brought it up.
And obviously, if you, we're gonna spoil the movie from here on out. The whole opportunity given to the people in this film, given to humanity, is the wormhole, which NASA has sent probes into and also people into. And the wormhole, they know, was placed there by someone, which they don't at the time. They don't know who put the wormhole there. But we learn by the end of the film that we put the wormhole there, as in humanity, the future of humanity. And we're talking humanity so far into the future that they've evolved through dimensions. They've evolved onto a fifth dimensional plane where it's this great idea that, like, whenever people talk about aliens or aliens coming to Earth, it could be future versions of ourselves. You know what I mean? Just thousands and thousands, even millennia, millions of years ahead of us at this point in time.
Yeah, so who's they? That's one of the main questions asked in the film. And the wormhole near Saturn, it's a gravitational anomaly. I mean, not only is there that wormhole near Saturn, but there's also the gravitational anomalies on Earth. For example, it's what caused Coop to crash his ship in that dream that he has, the flashback dream. Also, it's the gravitational anomalies are the dust in Murph's room, which shows the Morse code or the binary code. Also, the books falling off the shelf. Technically, that's a gravitational anomaly too, because that's also somebody interacting with gravity to go through time.
It's not like these things are happening all over the world to other people. These things are happening specifically to Cooper and Murph because they have been tasked with saving the Earth, but they don't know it yet. That's why.
It's not saving the Earth, it's saving humanity.
Saving humanity, sorry. And so it's not like these anomalies are occurring all over the place. And obviously we know that the books are falling out of the shelf because that is Coop inside the Tesseract knocking the books over. But because at that moment in the film, he's inside of a fifth dimension, which has been turned into a physical third dimension for him to interact with. Fifth dimensional beings, time for them is not relative. It's just
everywhere.
It's everywhere. It's a circle.
It's happening all at once.
So they can explore any moment in time just by walking through a doorway or something. Or like Dr. Brandt, Anne Hathaway, it's a great metaphor where she says going into the past could be like walking down a canyon, and then going into the future could be walking up a mountain.
Yeah, but it's kind of like Arrival, that concept of those alien beings, spoiler alert, they experience time as a loop that they can access at all times. It's a little different. It's a similar concept here where time is happening all at once, and these fifth dimensional beings are perceiving it all at once. But you can also imagine that they're experiencing time from beginning to end forever, the entirety of time. So how the hell do they pinpoint where to find this person or find the right spot in time in all this entirety of existence to find Murph at the right moments inside her bedroom? That's why Coop is tasked, because obviously Murph is chosen to save humanity with the equation, but Coop is tasked with being put inside the 3D construct in the fifth dimension, the Tesseract, to be able to use love to transcend time, to transcend time and dimensions, to find Murph, to send the quantum data at the end of the film.
And if you think too hard about this, it could really hurt your head.
I mean, we're talking about grandfather paradox.
The grandfather paradox, because how did Cooper get tasked with this mission in the present if he didn't even accomplish it yet and save humanity yet? And so
how did the bulk beings survive?
Yeah, how do they survive, and how do they send this message of the binary code on their floor if it didn't even happen yet? And so it's the grandfather paradox is a very confusing anomaly that's been used in movies like The Terminator, where if like for example, if like if my grandfather is born and has a son, and then that person has a son, I'm the son of the father, and then if I travel back in time and kill my grandfather, then I could never have been born, and I could never have traveled back in time
Or killed my grandfather.
So none of it could have been possible, but yet it is inevitable. And so it's a very confusing concept, but the trick is to just not think too hard about it and just kind of accept it, because otherwise the Terminator doesn't work, but it's a movie, so just let it play out, and it's fun to think about and fun to watch. So you gotta approach it with this kind of air of just accepting it.
Yeah, but aside from things like that, this film is actually pretty spot on with the science. And Kip Thorne, who's a theoretical physicist, he helped develop the story and the script, and the filming concepts themselves are based on actual science in terms of the wormholes, black holes, how gravity affects times. Because early in pre-production, Dr. Kip Thorne, he laid down 2 guidelines for Chris Nolan to follow for him to consult on the film, and that would be nothing would violate established physical laws, and that all the wild speculations that like a director would come up with just for a cool scene or concept in a film, that wouldn't happen, and that it would be based on science. And he even had a 2-week discussion of talking Chris Nolan out of having people traveling at the speed of light or faster than the speed of light.
That's impossible.
According to Kip Thorne, the largest degree of a creative license that Chris Nolan took in this film is the ice clouds on Dr. Mann's planet. Those structures probably wouldn't be possible to be formed based on the material strength that the ice, it wouldn't be able to support itself floating.
Yeah, because it's gas.
Yeah,
so it wouldn't be able to solidify like that.
And in terms of the black hole and wormhole, Kip Thorne, he actually collaborated with the visual effects supervisor in their team at Double Negative he basically gave them tons of pages of deep source theoretical equations to this team, and they created new CGI software programs based on those equations to create accurate computer simulations of these phenomena. And the cool thing about it is no one had never seen a black hole before, and until you saw this movie and you saw the great, beautiful image of the black hole. But that was actually confirmed a few years later when it was NASA with the telescope got the first actual images of a black hole, and it looked just like the black hole in Interstellar.
Yeah, it was dead on accurate. It's amazing. In Kip Thorne, he's not just like any old physicist. Like this guy was a good friend of Stephen Hawking. You know, like the same caliber of intellect. You know what I mean? So this is a very intelligent guy, and the equations in Dr. Brand's office were actually written by Kip Thorne. They are real equations of mathematics on gravity and black holes. So that's all real. The reason why it works is because it adheres so much to reality and the rules of the universe and the rules of that we know on Earth. And Christopher Nolan, everyone knows, is a very practical filmmaker. And the practical effects on this film are second to none. I mean, he built everything he could. The only CGI there is like the space travel and the wormhole and the star and
the waves,
that giant wave. But otherwise, it's
shot real locations.
Yeah, all the ships were real miniatures. Like every single ship, all locations. Like even on the water planet, when the ship lands on the water, like they actually built a real replica ship and literally took a crane and just splashed it into the water. So Christopher Nolan is. His practicality in filmmaking has always been one of his strengths. And even the Tesseract at the end of the film, that's a real set they really built. Like you would think that's all CGI, but
they did incorporate CGI on top of it.
Yeah, so they built, I think, 4 stories worth of that set with different rooms, with different Murph rooms. And the actress Mackenzie Foy would actually walk into these different rooms for all the shots. And then Matthew McConaughey was actually hanging on wires, moving throughout this entire space. And then they extended it with CGI, yes, but what he's interacting with physically, that was all built on set. Like that's not CGI, and that's why it looks so good. And probably my favorite practical effect is the cornfield on their farm, the Cooper farm, in which they have acres and acres of corn, which Christopher Nolan and the crew actually grew beforehand, before filming. Because what's really cool about the location of the farmhouse is, if you look on the shots, there are small mountains behind it, and it's actually nearly impossible to grow any kind of crops on land that is that close to mountains in that area because the soil is so dry. and high in salt. And so no one thought they would be able to grow any crops because no one does there. That's why you'll never see farmland like with mountains, really. You know what I mean? But they actually tried it out and they planted like millions of seeds and they grew this gigantic cornfield, really filmed inside of it, drove those trucks and cars through the cornfield. And then when they were done filming the movie, Christopher Nolan and the crew sold all of the corn and made a profit on it.
Yeah, just put some of that Chris Nolan super juice inside of there. Who knows what? In the real locations, he shot, obviously we're in different planets, different galaxies, but he did it practically. He went to locations like Alberta, Canada, and he used Iceland's, I'm going to mispronounce the hell out of this, Svefjokul Glacier,
Sounded perfect.
Which is the same glacier that he used when he filmed Batman Begins, where Ra's al Ghul and Bruce Wayne are sword fighting and in those opening shots and everything.
One of my favorite scenes.
On the ice. And so that's the same glacier as Batman Begins that is the ice planet. But there was recently, before filming, a volcanic eruption, and it spread gray ash all over the glacier. So it actually made it this dark gray effect, and it makes it look like a different planet.
Yeah, it looks like it's an unnatural part of the environment that could not exist on Earth, but it does. And it's amazing. Miller's planet is awesome too, that water planet. And I just love that scene when they land and you see the background and it looks like there's just like a mountain range in the distance. And then when they realize that it's actually this like 200-foot wave that's just approaching them unrelentingly, it's an unbelievable scene. It's so dramatic, and Hans Zimmer's score for that is just heart-pounding. I love that scene.
Let's talk about time, because it's something that Nolan is clearly obsessed with, because he has it in so many aspects of his film in terms of a theme or a motif, but also he plays with it so much in all of his stories. And again, we don't really understand time, and time and space are connected, and time exists all at once. But again, we experience it as past, present, or future because we're linear beings, but these fifth dimensional beings experience it all times at once. So humans can only experience the now, and we're moving forward. But in the film, and according to science, this is scientifically proven, time is changed depending on gravity. So it moves slower for those in strong gravitational force. And it was confirmed using clocks, where there was a clock on Earth, and then they sent a clock above Earth's gravity, and the one that's away from the gravity moves slightly faster. So now picture that with a black hole, the gravitational pull of a black hole, like as strong as a force that's on Miller's planet, which is the waves are caused from the gravitational pull of the black hole that it orbits.
So the stronger the gravitational force, the slower time passes by in comparison with ours, and that's why about an hour on Miller's planet equates to, 7 years on Earth, which is an unbelievable plot point and an intense moment of conflict. And I think it's Nolan's best theorized plot device on time in his entire filmography. I think it's absolutely genius because the stakes couldn't be higher. I mean, every second literally counts while they're on Miller's planet, and it's a vital part of the scene. It ends in failure, and it's a turning point for the film because you want this team to succeed, but you clearly see that Miller in Cooper even says like they're not prepared for this. They might have had theories and they might have gotten the mathematics right, but it's one thing to write about it on a piece of paper and put the equation in a computer, but it's another thing to actually experience it.
Yeah, Miller's Planet, it's literally a movie within itself. It's like a movie in a movie, like a dream within a dream. And before they go down there, they're talking about how Plan A doesn't work if people on Earth are all dead. So that's why they have to think of time as a resource while they're down on Miller's Planet, because time's relative. It can stretch and squeeze, but it can't travel backwards, which is what Cooper's trying to fix once they're down there and they come back and they lose Doyle and they lose 23 years of Earth time. And it's a really powerful scene because not only does it present a massive problem and consequence to these characters that up until this point we're like, oh, they're in space, oh, they're going to go save the world, it's going to be great. But we actually have this intense scene. It shows that, like you said, they're underprepared in a way. They don't really know what they're dealing with, no matter how much they think they understand space. And the sheer size of those waves, they got to be like 300 feet tall. That's just a wake-up call that they have no idea what the hell they're in for. They're in a different galaxy. They're in different planets. And Cooper's trying to think of ways when him and Brand are stuck on the ship waiting for the engines to drain. He's like, maybe the bulk beings can help us get that time back. Maybe if we reach them, they can help us out. And Brand's trying to explain to him that we're linear beings. Those are 5-dimensional beings. Like you said earlier, to them, going into the past is like a canyon they can climb into, or a future is a mountain that they climb up, and they just can't get that time back. You can only stretch or squeeze time.
It's that humans can't like reverse time unless it's Tenet.
Yeah. Well, she's saying in general you can't reverse time. It's not the bulk beings can't reverse time. They're just experiencing it all at once.
There is no reversing time. There's just traveling for a fifth dimensional being, just moving into a different area of time.
And then one of the most heartbreaking scenes of the film comes right after Miller's Planet, when they get back up to the Endurance. And first we see Romley, who's played by David Gyasi, and he's a great performance in this scene. In particular, he's exceptional, because how do you picture somebody who's been alone for 23 years, even though he's taken some long sleeps? He's been alone on a ship for 23 years. I don't know how this guy lasted this long. I would have been like, lights out, bro.
Where are the pills?
I'm good. Like, there's got to be something on here that I can end this with. But even after that, then they have the scene where Cooper is watching the years of messages from his family back on Earth, and we watch Tom and his life, and we watch how his first son died, Jesse, and then we watch he has a new son named Coop. And it's a really emotional scene, because Nolan just keeps the camera really just on Coop the whole time, and he's watching these videos of a future that he could have had that are now memories that he never experienced. And the audience never experienced that either. We didn't experience growing up with these people or their storylines. And so it's so dramatic, because it shows you how you should really cherish those moments you have with your family, with your children in your past, so that you can actually have those memories for the future.
And it also shows the real cost of the mistake on Miller's Planet, because, I mean, it's one thing to say, oh, we lost 23 years, but Nolan wisely shows that with the footage of his family, where it was 3 hours for Coop between leave Miller's Planet and then coming to the seat in front of the TV screen, and his children became adults. And McConaughey knocks the scene out of the park. It's unbelievable acting. He breaks my heart every time, and it's an incredibly powerful scene, but also it's such an original scene, because you've never seen a scene like it before. No scene had ever done that before. What other movie has a parent watching the footage of his children that he missed growing up? It's such a great concept.
Yeah, and a lot of people, I don't think they understand how 23 years passed while they're on Miller's Planet, even though it seems like they were just down there for a few minutes. But you got to understand, when you're watching a movie, you can't always just look at it in terms of time versus time of you watching it.
Oh, like real time.
Like real time. And you got to understand that we don't see the entire journey of them inside the gravitational pull and atmosphere of Miller's Planet. We don't see them trying to find the beacon. We don't see them, the full landing sequence. We don't see them fully walking. And I think that Tars says that the waves come every 45 minutes, and they actually experience 2 waves. So you got to take with a grain of salt that you can't have a 3.5-hour movie scene. Nolan's trying to speed that up.
Of him and them two sitting in a spaceship.
Yeah, so you got to take it with a grain of salt. Movies are edited, they're cut up, unless there's a very specific sequence where a director's trying to tell you that this is only going to happen in 10 minutes, which doesn't happen very often, but it's not relative to the time you're watching it.
And it's the thing where Nolan gives you the information you need, but you just have to really pay attention, because like you just said, Tars says that a wave comes every 45 minutes. So at least 45 minutes has passed since that first wave. So we know they've been there for a while, even though it was like a 1 minute of screen time in the movie.
So technically, if you're counting the 2 waves that come, it's an hour and a half pretty much.
Yeah.
And so don't think it's like reading a book. You know, when you're reading a book, you're not counting like it's only been 1 minute and Harry Potter's still in his room. Like, don't think of when you're watching a movie just because you're watching it, it's relative to your time. Like, time's relative, so isn't watching a movie.
Yeah, exactly. And then another major element and theme in this movie that I think is really subtle, but I think is one of the main inspirations for the film is the theme of dust. And dust is prevalent throughout the entire film, whether it be the dust storms like the harkening back to the Dust Bowls of the 1950s, and
Those are real interviews, by the way.
yeah, that was real. Yeah, documentary footage from a real documentary about the Dust Bowl in the 50s, and the dust is a part of life, and it's destroying crops, and it's also filling up the atmosphere. And dust was used to translate the binary code.
Gotcha.
And then, but why dust? Why is it dust used in this movie so much? And I would guess that it's because of the really amazing fact that we all come from stardust. You know what I mean? Everything on Earth came from what was once the dust of a star.
And also, you could say that it signifies death because we all eventually become dust.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
So it's the dying planet, the dying human species are becoming dust.
And also, human species is another point where there's two ways of thinking about the crisis on Earth. And this comes into play with Dr. Brandt, Michael Caine's character, whereas people like Cooper and his daughter, Brandt, and they look at humanity, and even Murph when she becomes an adult, as a people, and a people that can be saved. Whereas Dr. Brand, Michael Caine, he's looking at humanity as a species. And by objectifying the humanity in that way, by making it less of a personal relationship between the idea of of humanity and just turning into it's just a species, I think that's what allows him to make the decision to put the astronauts on this mission, which he knows is not going to work out for Plan A, but will have to implement Plan B of starting a new colony of humans on another planet, because he's looking at the species, the future of the species, not the people on the planet. And so I think those are the two contradicting viewpoints on the crisis in the film that eventually clash when they learn the real truth of Dr. Brand's intentions, where they want to save the people on Earth, whereas he wants to save the species. And there's two very different ways of going about those.
Yeah, and I think they make it seem like Dr. Brand wants to make it seem like both options are possible, and we're going to go with Plan A, which is saving Earth and solving the gravity theorem and leaving Earth with as many people as they can, so that they don't have to use Plan B, which is abandoning all the people on Earth, using a population bomb on a planet that they find that is habitable with the 5,000 fertilized eggs, and starting brand new to keep the species alive. And Dr. Brand obviously lies throughout this film, and he justifies it where he says that no one would work hard or work as hard as they did to save humanity if they knew that humanity was doomed. So that he keeps up this lie, keeps up this facade, so that people are motivated to save the human species, to work hard to get people into space, going through that wormhole. The Lazarus missions, where they sent people into the wormhole 10 years ago to explore those 12 potentially habitable planets. And Lazarus, as Cooper says, or Dr. Mann says, had to come back from the dead, but Cooper says that he had to die first. So it's kind of a very symbolic message of the planet's dying, human beings are dying, and they're going to come back from the dead. But Cooper says, but they had to die first, so we can't kill the species and then come back to life. We have to save it.
And Brand, like we talked about, Cooper believes in hope. Brand understands the power of hope, which is why he's been lying to everyone about the mission, because he knew very early on that he would never be able to finish the gravity equation. He knew it would be impossible for him to do that, and they would never find a way off this planet. And so he instilled hope into the minds of those. It's very much like Bane in the prison, in the pit, where he puts Bruce at the bottom of the pit with the opening up top, so that he can just look at the hope that it brings them just the sight of escape, even though they can't escape. You don't fear death.
Your punishment must be more severe.
And there's also another sinister character who knew of this fake mission as well, and that's Dr. Mann, played by Matt Damon, who is a great character. And we've spoken about this before, how Matt Damon was left out of the marketing of the film. He wasn't in any trailers, not in any posters. His name didn't show up on any bit of marketing. So Nobody knew he was in this movie until you're watching the film an hour and a half into it. They open up the sleep chamber and Matt Damon sits up out of that. And you're just like...
I screamed.
It was like, that's Matt Damon? What?
I almost stood up in the movie theater.
Matt Damon's in this movie? It's great. It was a great reveal. It was so shocking. And it really was a turned the tables on the film because now we have a real antagonist on the crew.
Yeah, because up until this point, time has really just been the antagonist or the villain of the film. And now we actually have one in representation in physical form. And this happens right after... They get back from Miller's planet and they have to decide either to choose Edmund's planet or Man's planet because both are sending a positive signal. Man's planet is saying it's all good, come down and come check it out and we can hang out and have s'mores by a campfire. And then Edmund's planet is actually relaying better information. It's saying that it's organics and they have there's positive resources down there too.
But then I believe there's a difference where Edmund's is not radioing information. He's just radioing that he landed.
Yeah.
And so they don't know, like we'll find out at the end of the film that he actually died. But they don't know that yet. So Cooper smartly understands like that's a possibility where it could be a false radio just like Miller's planet.
Yeah, and Cooper's trying to make his decision on which planet to choose because they only have enough fuel to go to one planet and then make it back to Earth. Or they'd have to either just abandon Earth and then they could go to both planets. They don't have enough fuel for both options, so they have to either pick one planet and go home. And so they choose Man's planet because Coop had intuitively figured out that Brand is in love with Edmonds, and Brand starts talking about love and how it's something observable, it's powerful, it has to have meaning, it has to mean something. Maybe love is something we don't understand, maybe it's an artifact of another dimension we can't yet perceive. Love is the only thing we're capable of perceiving that transcends time, dimensions of time and space. I mean, we love people desperately who aren't even alive anymore. So how is that possible if it's not an important aspect of the universe? And Coop's trying to be objective and say that her decision is biased because she wants to see Edmonds again. She wants to see Wolf again. But she's on to something here with this concept of love that Cooper just doesn't understand yet.
And I think this is where a lot of people who don't like the movie, they find their biggest problem with this concept of love transcending time and space. And I think it's a really neat concept, and I think it's true in a lot of ways. And I mean, if you've ever experienced love or loss, you understand how powerful of a feeling it is. And maybe it's even more than just a feeling. You know what I mean? And it's hard to put into words because it can have such a powerful effect on us in our lives. And so I think Nolan is really talking about something really incredible in this moment, in this scene, and I really love it, actually.
Yeah, and maybe humans are just afraid to love, and that's why they're so cynical about it and everything. And then I love how after the scene, Dr. Mann tells them that after they come back, they're going to have to decide between the fate of the human race or his children, and she hopes he'll be as objective then about the situation.
Ooh, burn.
But then let's get back to Dr. Mann's planet where he comes up and there's something off about Man. His body language is a little weird, and he's telling you everything you think you want to hear, but you look around this planet, and it's like, where could there possibly be resources? All I see is frozen tundra, and they're talking about pneumonia in the air, and so how does this work? And the days are 67 hours long, and the nights are 68 hours long, and they're incredibly cold and freezing, and it's just frozen planet, and we eventually learn that these are all complete lies. He knew about Dr. Brand's lie that Plan A was a facade. And before Dr. Mann's gonna do that little mission with Coop, Brand gets the message back from Murph that her father's died. And Murph obviously is upset, and that's when this movie gets kind of dark and she has that confession online on the video feed. And Dr. Mann blatantly confesses that there was no need to come back. Plan A was a facade. In Dr. Mann's planet, they don't know it yet. It's a complete lie that it's habitable. And he explains that Dr. Brand, he couldn't reconcile relativity with quantum mechanics because you need to see inside of a black hole and you can't see the singularity. And without that information and data, you can't solve the equation or the theorem of gravity.
I think that Dr. Man is called man for a reason. I believe it implies the flaw of humanity and the flaw that a person has, and we're not perfect beings, and we make mistakes. And as amazing and remarkable as the cast keeps saying that Dr. Man is
The best of all of us.
he's still just a flawed individual. And we learned that his biggest flaw was his arrogance, because he tells Coop before he attacks him that he never imagined that the planet he landed on wouldn't be the one. So he was so stubborn and arrogant that he believed that he was the one out of the 12 astronauts that was going to the habitable planet. And then when he landed on this ice planet, he was shocked and surprised by the outcome of landing on a dead planet. And that arrogance led to fear, and especially the fear of death, because it seemed as though he didn't fear death by being the person who led the mission and encouraged the others to join the mission. But clearly when he realized that he was going to die,
Which was as soon as he landed.
yeah, as soon as he landed, when he realized, oh, I am going to die, which he never even considered, then he panicked and came up with a scheme to radio out that he found life in order to be saved.
Yeah, it's interesting because a lot of the dialogue that he says while him and Cooper are traveling, it's a lot about survival and life, and he's talking about how that yearning to be with other people is so powerful, and he's just saying things that you can only imagine that someone that's been alone for a decade would be thinking about every day of their life. And he's talking about how machines don't improvise well because they can't compute the fear of death, and human beings have survival instincts, and the last thing you see before your death is your children. And like you say, he never considered the possibility that his planet wasn't the one. And even when he's attacking Coop and he's smashing his helmet against Coop's just trying to calm him down. He's like, Dr. Man, you have a 50-50 shot of killing yourself. And he's like, that's the best odds I've had in years. And even he observes Coop while Coop is suffocating and dying, and he's talking him through his death because he doesn't think that he's a bad person or a villain, but his survival instincts are kicking in so powerfully that he's willing to sacrifice people and kill people in order to survive himself.
But then the arrogance, believing that he's the one who has to carry out the mission, which is why he's going to sabotage their mission, because he wants to be the one that leads humanity into its next its next civilization and the next stage of its survival, because he wants the glory more than anything, I think, as well.
Yeah, and not only does he try to kill Coop, but he plants the bomb inside his TARS robot, which Romley unfortunately blows up in that explosion. Then he steals the ship that they came to the planet with, and then his plan is to dock the Endurance and take over the mission, like you said.
And that docking sequence, man,
that's my favorite scene in film ever.
It's so good.
Because this is
great.
Like you said, the arrogance and hubris of Dr. Man. He thinks that he can come onto this ship, dock it despite not having the skills to manually dock it according to the procedures of the Endurance.
Well, it's not the skills, it's that they turned off the auto lock ability.
So yeah, they turned off the auto docking sequence, but also he doesn't know the manual commands to dock to the Endurance ship with the ship. So he's gonna dock even though the computer is screaming error, and even though
it's breached.
And even though he knows it's not locked on, and Brand's telling him not to open the airlock, his arrogance and also his survival instinct is saying, no matter what, this is going to work and I don't want to die.
Yeah, the hubris of man, I think, is the essence of his character. And the docking sequence is great because you think that, oh, the world's over, like humanity's never going to survive. And it's an amazing sequence where Coop takes his ship, and obviously we know that the station is rotating very quickly. What makes the scene so great, which we mentioned earlier, is that it's all practical. Like, this is all...
They really had a ship, and they really docked it in space.
Yeah. No, but they really built these miniatures, and really the light, I mean, you could just tell with the light pouring onto these spaceships, like, oh, that's real. And it feels tangible, and it feels like it's really there in front of you, and that's why it's so powerful.
Yeah, because the fate of humanity rests on the shoulders of Coop and TARS to be able to dock to the spinning ship at an incredible rate of speed, something improbable.
Once he does dock, we get the amazing encounter with the black hole. And gargantuan. And the black hole itself, I think, is probably the apex of this movie, because like we've said, no one had ever seen one. We don't know what they look like, let alone up close and in person. And when that ship teeters along the light rays of this black hole and then enters it, it's like is the most exciting science fiction sequence since Kubrick's 2001: A Space Odyssey. There's nothing else compares to those two.
Yeah, because once they come up from man's planet and they've docked they've docked to the Endurance, and Cooper is able to thrust it out of the gravitational pull of the planet. They get stuck in the gravitational pull of Gargantuan, and they don't have enough support to make it to Earth. They may be able to have enough to make it to Edmonds, so Coop decides to use the gravity of Gargantuan to slingshot to Edmonds' planet. But again, he mentions a few times in the film, Newton's third law leaves something behind, and this is where he sacrifices himself, and TARS sacrifices himself too, to drop from the ship in order to give it enough lightness and weight to make it to Edmonds' planet and escape the gravitational pull.
The sequence inside of the black hole, it's really amazing. At first, it begins with, it looks like sand pouring on. Pretty soon, he's just overtaken by black emptiness. Rocks start hitting the ship, and he has to bail out, so he's flying through this emptiness, and could be my favorite shot in the movie, where he straps the camera to Cooper looking down at his feet like a POV, and you see something in the distance, and he gets closer and closer to it, and we see that it's the Tesseract, and he falls into one of these alleys within the Tesseract, and it's an amazing effect. And when I saw this in theaters for the first time, I was like, what is happening?
Terrified.
It's
Again,
crazy.
there are some real horror elements to this film and some very terrifying scenes.
Yeah.
This scene with the score that Zimmer provided of this thrashing noise, it's terrifying.
Yeah, very scary.
And just like Coop, I was filled with dread, because Coop is filled with fear and dread, because no one's ever been this far in the history of humanity, maybe in the history of the galaxy or universe. And the cool thing about it is, I think Coop, the character he is, the explorer he is, he didn't hesitate to sacrifice himself and fall into this black hole, because he's still trying to save the planet. He's still trying to gather information, as he's even collecting information for whatever's recording his ship. He's saying, I see blackness, I see shocks, lights, this and that. So he's trying to observe and report information. And Cooper's in this Tesseract, and it's a structure that you could probably never imagine if you're a person until you see this movie. And he's trying to work out where he is, and he sees all these images of his daughter's bedroom, and Murph's here, and Murph's a different age over here, and the scenes that he sees himself, and he's starting to work out that he was the ghost all along in Murph's bedroom, and the ghost that didn't haunt her but was trying to communicate with her and try to communicate with himself while he's in that room.
And what's really powerful is that when he sees his daughter as a young girl again, he's filled with intense regret. And that's why he's slamming on the bookshelf and creating Morse code signals, trying to tell himself to stay and not to leave, because he feels remorse for abandoning his daughter. And even though the chance of saving humanity lays at his feet, all he wants is to see his little girl again.
Yeah, because leaving Murph and leaving the planet filled Murph with nothing but animosity towards her father. She never would send him video messages. She only sent one on the birthday that she turned the same age as Coop when he left Earth. That's the only time she ever sent a video message. So she's been filled with anger towards her father for decades. For 23 years, she's been filled with anger. And
which you can imagine is definitely plausible, and especially the fact that she can't even spend too much time in the house that she grew up in, because I think she is dealing with so much traumatic pain from the abandonment of her father that she can't even deal with being inside the house for more than probably an hour or so.
Yeah, and she thinks that Coop abandoned her, especially when Dr. Brand is on his deathbed, and the last thing he says to her, she thinks that it means that Coop knew the whole time, and she thought that Coop left because he wanted to save himself, and that's when he's asking Brand when she sends the video message, "Did you know? Did you know that this is all a joke? This is all a sham?" And because Murph has so much love for her father, that's why she's feeling so emotional, and that's what's really allows Coop to figure out what's happening inside this Tesseract, why he's there, who these bulk beings are, and how he can use love, and how he's able to use Murph's love for him to pinpoint the location of her in the watch.
And this is where love comes in, because yes, he uses gravity to communicate through time, but that gravity, you can say, is motivated by love. So it wouldn't have happened without love.
Yeah, he wouldn't be able to find Murph. They both love each other very much, but I think it's really, despite Murph hating her father, she also loves him intensely.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at Chastain's clothing in this, she dresses just like Cooper does.
And he uses the watch because he knew she'd come back for it because he gave it to her.
Yeah, and it's like, doesn't matter what time she comes back for it. It's just as long as she comes back for it eventually.
So he uses love to find the right moment to send the quantum data that TARS relays to him, which who knows how long that would have taken to do in Morse code. My God.
Jeez.
And
imagine messing one up.
Yeah. And this is Coop understanding that they didn't bring us here to change the past. We brought ourselves, and Murph was chosen. He's realizing that he brought himself here with those coordinates that he asked TARS to relay to him. So he brought himself to the Tesseract on this mission with those coordinates, and he says that we're the bridge. Humans are the bridge between the fifth dimensional beings because we are the fifth dimensional beings.
That's the biggest grandfather paradox, the dust, because like, how could he leave the binary code if he didn't know what it was? He only knew what it was because of seeing the code in the past.
And well, he only knows what it is because TARS relays him. So yeah, and he wouldn't even be crazy. There. Another grandfather paradox.
It's crazy. And then when his mission is done, and the future beings are like, nice job. They send him back outside of Saturn, and he's picked up and he's brought to Elon Musk's space station.
Cooper Station. But really, love is the key. And that was the connection, because their connection of love is quantifiable.
Yeah.
And it's, again, like you talked about how no one ever seen a scene in a film where a man or a father or a parent is watching videos of decades lost of time of their children that he just lost. He just was in the same time area with them 3 hours before. No one ever seen anything like that before, watching that information and dealing with the aging of their children. Then we have a father who's at his daughter's deathbed who's elderly compared to him.
So Murph is considered the savior of humanity, although she had tried to tell everyone over the decades that Cooper was the one who relayed the information, but no one believed her that he survived and was able to send information through dimension or time and space, and so she is considered the savior of humanity, hence the name of the space station being named after her. There's that cute scene where it's called Murph Station and
Coop Station.
Called Coop Station, and he's like, "Oh, it's nice that you named it after me." And the doctor's like, "It's named after your daughter."
It's Murphy Cooper we're talking about here.
But again, we get that theme of living in the past again in the space station, where Cooper doesn't really like the idea of the space station replicating the old world,
pretending like we're living where we used to be,
because I think that we could probably fall into the same scheme, the same kind of problems. So he doesn't like that about this world, which is why Murph basically just gives him permission to leave, and he finally, at the end of this film, has the ability to go out and set off into the unknown again and explore again, because I think that someone like him, as an explorer, as an adventurer, he can't just sit down and live life on the ground, on the earth. He needs to be out there discovering, and I think that's what drives him, that hope of discovery and the anticipation of exploration.
Yeah, even though he was in a fifth dimension using a third dimensional structure in a black hole, he comes back and the next day he's like, all right, where are we going next, guys?
It wasn't good enough.
It's amazing. This guy's life. It's like Speed. Like you need more and more and more. He can never be satisfied, bro.
In the ending of this movie, I think that he's definitely going to find Dr. Brandt on Edmund's planet.
Yeah.
And they're going to like colonize the Earth, the new Earth.
Yeah, they'll definitely colonize. Well, the planet's probably going to be called Brand.
Oh, yeah.
And I love the ending of this film, and I know a lot of people want a sequel to this movie, and they're like, oh, he perfectly set it up for a sequel where Cooper finds Dr. Brand on the planet Brand, and they colonize the Earth, and maybe they fight aliens and whatnot, or who knows, and maybe there's like space tigers on that planet that I don't know. But movies don't need sequels, especially masterpieces, especially phenomenal movies like this. Chris Nolan does not make sequels outside of the Batman franchise. That's different. That's comic books. That's a superhero. It's a franchise. He's never made a sequel to any of his original films, ever. So he's never going to make a sequel to Interstellar, I don't think. I'd be shocked. I think if the next time he makes a movie that requires a sequel, it'd be like a Bond movie if he ever did that. But I don't ever see a sequel be made of this. I don't see a sequel being made of Tenet or nothing. It doesn't need it.
The thing is, with every Nolan movie, it ends with possibility. And so all of his movies, they end, but the stories aren't concluded fully. Every single one of his movies, except for Insomnia, which he didn't write.
Yeah, so, even Inception is not really over. Is he sleeping or not?
Memento, Dark Knight Rises, Inception, this movie, Tenet, I mean, The Prestige. So all the movies, they end, but the stories aren't over yet. And I think that's one of the strengths to his storytelling and his writing, because when a Nolan movie's over, all you can think about is like, oh, what happens after this? You know what I mean? So it's not like another normal movie where, oh, the movie ended, the story's over. What a great ending. It's like, I am so curious, like, what happens to the character after this point in time? And so I think that's what he always does. And that's why people want sequels oftentimes with his movies. But I think that it's best if we just imagine it for ourselves.
So, I want to go back and just talk a little bit. I have some more stuff to talk about the movie.
Sure. I mean, I'm good, but if you want.
And there's some other great aspects of this film that I love to think about, especially the relationship between Murph and Cooper, where these two characters, father and daughter, they're so similar. They're both very intelligent, motivated. They're both stubborn as hell. They prefer figuring things out for themselves. Murph is just as much an explorer as Coop is in a way. You know, she sneaks into his truck when he's going to explore those coordinates. And Coop, he doesn't want to be stuck on Earth. And Murph is focused on exploring saving humanity. So I think there's so many similarities between these two characters, and I think Chris Nolan shows that not just in their personalities, but also in their wardrobe, where she's still wearing the jacket that he wore.
Well, it's not the same jacket.
But it's very similar.
It's very similar.
Yeah. 23 years later, even though she basically hates her father.
As much animosity as she has for him, she's committed her life to being a part of the same mission as him.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
And I also want to give a shout out to Tars.
Tars is a star.
Who's this great robot. It's a former Marine robot, and this is this giant sarcastic robot half the time. And it's one of my favorite characters, and there's actually, obviously some of the shots of Tars are CGI, but a lot of it is actual real practical effects with a puppeteer behind Tars the robot itself, just wearing a gray leotard. And
the actor Bill Irwin, who's in a lot of Curb Your Enthusiasm, he plays one of his friends. He's the performer.
And Tars is kind of like Coop's best friend in this movie, and he's with him throughout all the missions. He's with him later in the end, and Coop uses Tars as sort of a connection in a way to leaving the past behind, because Tars follows him bravely in every avenue that he follows, and he helps him steal the jet at the end of the mission, at the end of the film, and takes off with Tars. And Tars, he fixes Tars up and fixes his humor setting and brings it down to 65. But I just love the relationship between Tars and Cooper, and Tars is one of my favorite characters for sure.
Why are you whispering? They can't hear us. If you look at behind-the-scenes footage of the movie, not footage, but they only have it in photos, you can see the actor. He literally, he was standing on, like, they put like some kind of like little platforms on the bottom of Tars, and he just stood on those, and so he was able to puppeteer and walk with it. But he's always wearing just like, it wasn't like he's wearing like a mocap suit. He's just wearing like black Under Armour pants and a shirt. But it's a really great effect. And Christopher Nolan came up with the idea of the shape of the robot because he wanted it to be different and he wanted it to be unexpected. But also it had to be practical and be able to, move in these scenes and do things. And so the first people he tested the idea out on were his children. And so he had his production designer made a small version of TARS, like a model, and he showed it to his kids. And Nolan's kids were like, oh, it looks kind of dumb. It's just like, this rectangle block? But then they saw the different appendages of TARS and how it can move and interact with the environment. And then they were like, okay, this is actually pretty cool. So once he saw that his kids accepted it and liked the idea of this type of a robot, then that gave him the green light pretty much to be like, okay, let's make this the robot in the movie.
What I love about TARS is he has this 90% honesty programming, and it kind of relates back to 2001: A Space Odyssey with HAL 9000, which the ship's computer, if that had the programming like that as well, maybe that computer doesn't have the ability. If it had the ability to lie and overcome problems when he interacts with humans, maybe he doesn't turn on human beings and try to take over the mission and kill them.
That's a good point, because the reason why HAL malfunctions is because he has to keep information from the astronauts at the order of NASA. And that's what causes like his programming to malfunction.
He doesn't like understand how to lie or do it.
Yeah.
All right, that wraps our episode on Interstellar, written and directed by Christopher Nolan, also written by Jonathan Nolan. Thank you so much for tuning into this episode. Be sure to go to RaidersOfTheLostPodcast.com to check out all of our merch, our movie posters, and also become a patron. Get all the cool perks included, like videos, podcast schedules. You get a patron shout out every month if you're a top tier patron, and also exclusive giveaways.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you for watching Raiders of the Lost podcast. Hit that subscribe button and notification bell. Listen to the audio format of Raiders of the Lost podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and wherever you listen to podcasts. New episodes every Monday and Thursday. Support us on Patreon at patreon.com/Raiders of the Lost podcast.